A raid in an exclusive South Florida neighborhood, where authorities arrested music executive Naim Jorge Bonilla. Bonilla, allegedly just one member of a wide-ranging drug trafficking ring that prosecutors say became one of the largest suppliers of cocaine into the United States and Canada, and was led by Ryan James Wedding, a former Canadian Olympic snowboarder turned alleged drug lord and now fugitive.
This group was ruthless and violent. They would use contract killers to assassinate anyone who they saw as an obstacle to their operation.
Was it the fire burning in me? All of the noise.
Let's listen to Pavarotti.
Hello, welcome to The Revealing. I'm your host Pavarotti, here to discuss the Idaho 4 case. And this is the episode that some of you have been waiting for. This is going to be part 3 to the investigation series. And we're going to get into some things that may get a little strange in this one. So before I do that though, it's almost like some days I wake up in this world and the whole world is upside down. Like the meanings of things flipped completely upside down. And what I'm discussing is the difference between true crime discussions and conspiracy theories. Because one of the reasons that I wanted to get involved in the conversation of this case specifically is because I wanted to be able to explain the differences between real possibilities, real true crime possibilities, and conspiracy theories. Because you see, folks, a lot of people out there were just going wild with real conspiracy theories. Because let me explain the difference to you. A conspiracy theory is taking people that have no history of crime whatsoever and developing a theory based on them. Okay, that's where we get into the frat boys, Jack D, the grub truck. See, all the scenarios surrounding those three, while maybe even plausible, not saying that they're not, but they are the true meaning, the true definition of a conspiracy theory. Because they've never committed any crimes. There is nothing that indicates that that could happen other than the thoughts in our minds. Now you can back it up with, well, this happened, this person knows this person. But there isn't any documented crimes. So when I discuss the things that I discuss, see, I'm talking about real true crime. When you talk about true crime, I'm talking true crime. I'm talking arrest records for crimes that were committed. They were true. I'm talking about narcotics being trafficked. Really easy to verify with the trafficking charge next to their name. These are things that really happen. This is true crime, what I'm discussing. The other things out there that people would love to discuss, and I don't know why they don't, it's not like when you discuss those conspiracy theories that people didn't get on there and say, no, this is dumb. I know, because I used to look at those comments on those conspiracy theories. So there's no reason why people can't still discuss those things if they were still relevant. Now, the fact that people do discuss them now and they don't get the views they used to get because for whatever reason, that should tell you it's because those things really aren't relevant. Nothing has been proven. They've been talked about until they can't be talked about anymore with, people's interest. Now, the things that I'm discussing seems to get some interest because what I'm discussing is true crime. You got to figure out the difference before you speak on it. Because when you speak on things that are true crime, as if they're conspiracy theories, but then you discuss conspiracy theories as if they're true crime, you got it all backwards. So you just got to clear that out in your mind first. But I digress. Let's get into what this thing is really about, and that's part 3, the conclusion. We're going to get back into the true crime aspect of this, and we're going to expose some things, and we're going to take a look at some things that take us in some weird directions. Y'all ready? Let's go. This is part 3 of the Idaho 4 investigation series. Now, just a quick recap. In part 1 and 2, we discussed in length the ties to these 3 possible trafficking organizations, or crews to be more specific, and the leaders of those crews that we've titled the Alphas. And it's important to know the distinction between the 3, because where the rift comes up between the first and second one, I think greatly contributes to the third one's actions in the Idaho 4 case. Now, not just knowing the groups involved and their roles, but knowing the territories that they control, I believe is a very key aspect, again, to understanding this case that we call the Idaho 4. Now, we're going to focus in on this group and this route that is taken from up in Couer D'Alene, Idaho, all the way back down to Julietta, which is a really interesting location when you really think about it, and I'm going to share that with you here in a moment. But we've got the Alpha that owns both of the houses, and then we've got the 2 mules that are also user dealers that will be transporting what I believe is from his house in Couer D'Alene down to a place in Moscow, Idaho, and I believe other people pick it up from there. And I have a strong reason to believe that, and I'll explain that further as we get into this. But again, when we're talking true crime, everybody that I'm discussing right here has been arrested in the last 2 years for trafficking narcotics. So what I am saying when I describe this is as accurate as you could possibly be. This is not conspiracy theory. This is true. So keep this in mind as we look at this trafficking map, and let's move on to the next one. Now, this is strictly my opinion, but once you reach Moscow, Idaho, and your ultimate end goal is to get to Boise, and your stash house is located in Julietta, I think it's located there for a reason. And I believe it's so they can bypass the city of Lewiston, which would be a high-risk area to go through. So you can see by stopping in Moscow, they can either take a route straight down to Julietta through back roads, or they can go down to Genesee and go straight across through back roads. Either way, they're going to bypass Lewiston and then get back on 95 heading south to Boise in the end. So that looks to me to be the most strategic trafficking route that they could put together on this. And I have other reasons to believe this as well. Now, any trafficker that wants to consistently get packages from Couer D'Alene to Julietta would know just simply by looking at this map that their major hurdle in that route is going to be the city of Moscow. Because once you get into that populated area, you don't just deal with the county sheriffs, you then deal with the county sheriffs and the Moscow PD. So that is a high-risk stretch of road going through Moscow. So the only way they could consistently do that is if they had a couple of officers that work for the Moscow PD that could clear their path when they're coming through. And after an exhaustive amount of research into the officers that were working MPD at that time, I have zeroed in on these 2 individuals as the most likely candidates to be the greased officers. And I don't say that without legitimate reasons to suspect these two. Now, we all know of the odd actions of the one on the right there, the night of the atrocity, that just doesn't seem to make sense at all, and we'll discuss that much more in depth in a future video. But the one on the left also had some really odd actions and unique perspectives the morning after the atrocity as well. But is that the only reason to suspect them? Absolutely not, and I wouldn't dare put them up here if that was it. Now, close family ties between the officer and one of the traffickers is definitely cause for alarm, but that certainly wouldn't be the only reason that I would zero them out either. But that does create suspicion, in my opinion. And their, lack of earning opportunities as a officer there in Moscow at $49,000 doesn't help their case as far as having a good positive cash flow. But that would include all the officers there if I just used that metric. But no, it was the final metric of the Stickergate incident, where you can see it was documented that the Moscow PD buries evidence in sticker case for more than a year. And these were the officers involved in that. So that does lend all the credibility along with the other things that I would need to make these statements, because once an officer does something that is underhanded, illegal, false, they lie, well, then they're subject to do it all the time if they do it once. Which doesn't give me good vibes when I see that Gundy there was one of the first officers on the scene that morning, and you see him in this photo posed in a body language position that shows him tensed up, almost clenching his fist and looking over his shoulder as if he's done something wrong. I don't know. It just doesn't, give me a lot of confidence in the crime scene after, thinking and looking at things like this. So I would absolutely suspect those two to be greased officers that run interference, that allow the shipments to come through the city of Moscow down to south of town to that Germer construction building located in the Wasankari complex as the drop-off point to where things would be taken from there to Julietta. Now, obviously, something happened in September of 2022 that those two couldn't stop, because it was actually done through informants by use of the Drug Task Force. And we will discuss that in another video as well. So the movements from south of Moscow at what I suspect to be that Germer construction building from there to Julietta is something that makes the most sense to me. So I began to try to figure out who I thought was the most likely candidate to move things from south of Moscow down to Genesee and over to Julietta. And, as I do that, I start to think about, as they plug in, the coordinates of Koberger's phone, it starts in Genesee according to them, even though we know that wasn't accurate now based on their testimony. But for some reason to them, it made sense. And I was trying to think, why would that make sense to them? Once they plugged in a Genesee on that map, what were they really thinking at that time? Because we know this investigation's been hidden from us. And then I came across this individual. And we've been discussing the character known as MB, originally known as M. Kachka for some reason. He changed his name. But I started looking into some possible other candidates who could carry these loads. And then I came across another MB, just about 20 years younger. And as I looked further into his background, along with a plethora of arrests, I noticed that his addresses seemed to seem to be kind of interesting to me. So if you look on the addresses of the younger MB, you'll see that he resided in Genesee, Idaho, State Street on Pullman, Washington, and at one point he resided in Arvada, Colorado. Now those three places kind of piqued my interest a little bit, and I started thinking a little bit more. And then I thought of one of my longtime subscribers. She used to go by Cherokee Rose, and she has a blog on Substack where she is always discussing very detailed information about Mr. Brent Kopacka. And I started to think about the area around Julietta, which includes Kendrick, as she's brought up to me many times. And Kendrick is just right down the road from Julietta. And her research led her to Brent Kopacka being a resident for a significant amount of time in none other than Kendrick, Idaho. You can see 819 East Main Street in Kendrick. Really lives on the same street as MB and Julietta, just a town over. So that was interesting to me. And then I noticed she had saved this article, which I think tells you a ton about this investigation, folks. And we're going to discuss this one for just a minute because I think this is very important for you to grasp in a few different ways. But you can see the Idaho murders investigators traveled at least 24 miles to collect surveillance video related to the killings. And you can see it says Moscow, Idaho. Fox News has learned investigators traveled at least 24 miles to the east of Moscow, Idaho, to the nearby towns of Troy and Kendrick to acquire surveillance video in relation to the quadruple homicide of 4 University of Idaho students. A manager from the Food City store in Kendrick, about 24 miles east of Moscow, tells Fox News investigators asked for video camera on their property. Now here's the key. It said they asked for that footage on November the 30th. So where were they at in the investigation that led them to Kendrick, Idaho, and right there probably in Julietta as well on November 30th? It tells me that they were suspecting exactly what I'm discussing in this video today. The possibility of this group that I'm talking about being involved in the atrocity, and they would know why, folks, because they would know who snitched on them. But the other thing to take note here is the date that this article came out on December 16th. See, this is when the news dove in and found out about them collecting this video. Why would they do that on December 16th? Well, because Kopacka had just been unalive the day before. The news was associating Kopacka, because they knew he had lived in Kendrick, with the video collection of Kendrick, Idaho during the investigation. So when you stop and you start putting all that together, even Fox News, who apparently had some pretty decent investigative journalists on the scene, were digging into the right facts in this case. Let that sink in for just a minute. But the main thing that I'm thinking is, did Kopacka have a relationship with the younger Burroughs? Because of his proximity to Julietta and his proximity to his address in Pullman, Washington, which is just right around the corner from Kopacka. Which brings me back to the younger Burroughs here. And what did law enforcement really believe about this guy? And it also makes me consider something that I thought I had nailed down in the past, and that is the DoorDash driver. Is it possible that the younger Burroughs here was the actual DoorDash driver that evening, and the events around him that I've stated in the past with Emma B are actually one and the same? And would he have the ability to set up a Kopaka-Koberger combo because of his relationship with them? So did law enforcement think Brian had a relationship with this guy for some reason? Well, I don't know, but then I started really digging into the whole Burroughs-Kachka family, and I found something interesting. You see, a very close relative to Mr. M.B., originally M. Kachka, is a gentleman named Kachka who happens to reside in Allentown, Pennsylvania. You can see here's his address listed on the open internet for everybody to see. But when you plug in his location of this address with something else, the correlation is almost scary. You see, when you plug in his house on a map with the Sales University there in Pennsylvania, he literally lives 3.7 miles from the university door. I'm not saying that Koberger knew him for some reason, which would have given him somebody to connect with once he got out there to Pullman, but it is very interesting, and I have dug a little further and will continue to dig a little bit further. Like I said, weird. But I've been doing a lot of research on it, and I will continue to do research on it until I have something concrete. Let's not even go there at this point. We'll just continue to uncover things until we've got a more clear picture. But please like and subscribe to the channel. Post your comments, thoughts, criticisms. Till next time, Pavarotti's out.
Was it the fire burning in me?